who actually is here to share his incredible journey with all of you, and I think very inspiring way to look at recovery as an intimate and incomplete part of productivity. So without further ado, Matthew, the floor is yours, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much, Patrick, for having me. And it's a real honor to be speaking to everyone today and sharing some of your time because I know that we're all incredibly busy. And so it's very easy to just not log on. So thank you for logging on. So as has been discussed, I'm going to talk today about balancing rest and productivity. And I'd really like to make this somewhat interactive in that if you have any questions or comments that you want to make throughout, just unmute or raise your hand or something and share. I'm more than happy to answer questions throughout the time. And I think that makes it fun. So as Patrick said, I'm a medical student. I'm a professional Ironman triathlete. And I'm also do a lot of research on cancer, as well as some surgeon-based research as well. So I live a very busy life. And I always get asked, well, how do I balance it all? And that's the $1 million question. And I think it really comes down to optimizing and balancing what I call your effort and your recovery, or your outputs and your inputs. And I think there's a lot of kind of analogies and connections between triathlon training or just training in general, as well as normal life, where in order to perform, you also have to recover. And so these outlets, for me in particular, are things like doing research, training, spending time on relationships, either that's family, friends, sponsor obligations, studying as well. And then inputs, are sleep, training, nutrition, and relationships and hobbies. And I think one thing that I wanted to point out is that some of those things are on both sides of the scale, where things like relationships, they can be energizing, but they can also take away energy as well. Same thing with training. One of the things that I really have loved about triathlon is that it's my escape from medical school. And so I actually believe that triathlon helps me balance medical school. As crazy as training 30 hours a week might sound, but triathlon is my escape from medicine, and medicine is my escape from triathlon. And so things actually work out pretty well in that regard. So the first question that I kind of wanted to ask all of you is, what is productivity? Because I think that's a word that is used a lot these days. And so, of course, I had to go online and look up the dictionary and yada, yada, yada. The definition of productivity that I am the biggest fan of is where they use rate, the rate at which goods are produced or work is completed. Because I think that contrasts pretty sharply with how I feel like most people use productive in our day and like normal life, which is the amount of time spent on something. So like I would have tons of friends in college in particular that would be like, oh, like I had a really productive day. I spent 8 hours in the library. And I'm like, well, what did they do? And they're like, oh, I did this one assignment. And I'm like, are you kidding me? That should have taken you like 2 hours. And not like I'm not bashing them, their intelligence or anything, but the reality is that they would do like 15 minutes of work, 15 minutes on their phone, or 5 minutes of work, and then 10 minutes of YouTube. And so something that really should not have taken that long ended up taking an entire day. And that's kind of where I think I want to kind of talk about productivity, is really how do you optimize your time in terms of when you're actually using your time, and also the things that you can do around that in order to make the time where you're working actually more productive. And so, of course, I also Googled a couple quotes about productivity, and the ones that stood out to me the most is that Tim Ferriss, who's kind of an author, influencer, whatever you want to call him, he said, focus on being productive instead of busy, which really highlights kind of what I was just talking about. And then the other two are by Ernest Hemingway, who said, never mistake action for motion. And then Seth Godin, who is kind of an author on productivity and whatnot, who said, you don't need more time in your day, you need to decide. And that one I think is super important, because one of the things in college and in med school that I've noticed is that people say, oh, I don't have time for this, or I don't have time for that. And certainly there are times in life where that's true. Like if you're in the hospital for 18 hours in a day, you don't have time to go out and have dinner with your friend. Like you're physically constrained to your time in the hospital. But for a lot of aspects in life, it's really more of a choice. And that if you really, really, truly wanted to do something, like if you truly wanted to prioritize sleep or going to have coffee with someone, you can make it happen and you can prioritize it. So I think that's just an important thing to keep in mind is there's a difference between, what I guess is actually feasible and what is just prioritized differently. So I want to be careful and, not coming across as some influencer or, some guru that knows everything. This is all very much based on my own approach and how I do things, and take whatever you want or leave whatever you want from it. But kind of when I think about productivity, I kind of view it as three things. So first is what I call conducting an energy audit. And then the second is creating a framework for your day so that you have some consistency in how your day-to-day looks. And then also my third kind of rule is don't force it. So what I mean by conducting an energy audit is throughout the day, all of us have different times where we feel more focused or less focused, where we feel more energized or less, where we're just cognitively more with it or not. And so the first thing that I've kind of done over my lifespan is figure out, okay, what is the time of the day when I am the most excited or basically the most able to concentrate on studying or doing research or doing training or whatnot. And based on that kind of equation, for me, that's personally in the morning. So in the morning is when I have the most energy, the most focus, the most motivation. So that's where I put my most important tasks to be done during a day, is kind of shortly after I wake up. And then as the day goes on, I get tired. In particular, for me, the graph is pretty much just like that. And so I kind of, as the day goes on, I kind of do more mindless tasks, like sending emails or, just doing a chart review or something that doesn't necessarily require a high cognitive load. And I've had to talk to some of my friends about that as well, and it's worked for them. So that's why I've included it. So, basically it's like, do the things that are the hardest to do when you have the most energy. Because if you're doing hard things later in the day, when you really don't have motivation or energy, they'll probably take 2, 3, or 4 times longer than what they would otherwise. So then this building a framework is another kind of key tenet of how I focus on my day. And then I kind of try and structure my day around a few key things. So for me, as a professional triathlete, I have almost always have 2 workouts every day. So what that means is that I wake up, I do one workout in the morning, and then I do one workout right before dinner time generally. And so that's kind of like 2 pillars. And then kind of the other pillars are, okay, when do I have mandatory meetings and when do I have mandatory class times that I have to go to? So then that kind of fills in the calendar. Then I also always really try and be intentional about my relationship with my girlfriend and some of my friends. So, kind of evening time is when I devote to that. And so then I know that sounds like a lot, but there are still times in the day where there's not necessarily things scheduled. And that's kind of when I incorporate the other aspects of the day, the things like the studying or the research. And sometimes, like if there's an exam coming up, the studying gets bumped to the top and something that I really prioritize. But I found that like having a general framework where how things are going to go for the most part each day really helps, because there is a period of time where I literally would spend 45 minutes of my day figuring out what I was going to do during that day. And I was like, okay, well, this is a complete waste of time. I need to get these minutes back because it all counts. So that's what I mean by building a framework. And then the last thing is kind of something that I've developed, I guess, from training as well, which is don't force it. And that some days, maybe it's tired, maybe you're tired, maybe there's some, bad life event going on. Maybe you are just not having a good day. If that's the case, it's okay to just put things down, walk away, either for, go on a walk for 30 minutes, or maybe even just call the day off and say, what, like I'm going to be done for the next half day in terms of writing this paper, and then come back to it tomorrow when you have more energy and more focus. Now, again, sometimes like you can't just call off class if you're teaching, but this is more for things where that is the case, like research or other tasks like that. So and it's the same thing for triathlon. Like, I mean, for the most part, I try not to skip a workout, but there are definitely workouts where I've been like, I'm not motivated. I'm not in a headspace to do this super hard thing. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to pause this and like go take a nap and try it again later today. Or I've also done workouts like the next day. And that's gone much better than trying to force myself to do it. And it's much more enjoyable that way. So that's kind of the main things that I have to say about the productivity side of it. And then a big part, I think, that I really want to talk about is recovery, because really that's an area where I think a lot of us can do better, including myself, which is just um, like, if you don't prepare, if you don't let your body recover, and if you don't enable yourself to kind of rejuvenate, then your productivity each day is just going to slowly decline, because your energy levels and your motivations are going to go down. And so this recovery aspect is super important. Again, lots of analogies with athletics. Like, if all you do every single day is you do like a really hard workout, you're not going to get any better, because your body is just going to break down more and more and more and more. And I truly believe that, like, from a research standpoint and just a general life standpoint, that the same thing happens. Maybe it's not the same timeline, like maybe with training, pushing yourself super hard, like, will kind of blow up on yourself after a month. Whereas maybe in life, it takes a year or 2 years or 3 or 5, but it will happen eventually. And so we want to try and avoid that. So what I like to call the 4 pillars of recovery are sleep, nutrition, exercise, and energizers, which is just kind of a catch-all pillar for other things in your life that bring you energy and happiness, and help you kind of feel reinvigorated when it's time to get back to your research or teaching or whatever it may be. So sleep is the thing that I'm going to talk the most about, because it's something that I'm really passionate about. Another thing that Patrick may not know is that I also have sleep apnea, which was diagnosed in college. So basically, when I sleep, I stop breathing at times, which meant that for a while I was getting really poor quality sleep and really was not being able to recover. And I have treatment now, and things are much better. But that really piqued my interest in sleep, as well as being in a college environment where sleep is often neglected. Many college students don't go to bed until midnight or 1 a.m. and then they sleep in late, and just they're constantly over doing too much and doing a lot, and they're not prioritizing sleep. And so that really kind of got my interest into it as an athlete as well, because sleep and athletics is tightly intertwined. And I really try and keep that with most of my life now too. So, like, the stat, I guess, is that for the most part, there are weeks that are not as good. For the most part, I'm in bed for 8 to 9 hours every night, despite all of the things that I do, because I've made it a priority. And also because, from a realistic standpoint, there becomes a certain point in the day where I'm just too tired to do anything but sleep. So it kind of also forces itself in that way as well. But so statistics you might have heard, generally speaking, you should get about 8 hours of sleep every night, which is really 7 to 9 hours, depending on who you are. It's very person specific, but under 7 hours, no matter what, you don't do well. Study after study has shown that. Unfortunately, the US average is below 7 hours per night. So as a country, we could be doing better. And I have no doubt that at OSU, it probably is even worse, because other things that I've done in academia have shown that often it's worse in academia, because there's so much drive and pressure to produce papers and to teach and do all these different things, that sleep is often neglected. So a lot of people say, but there's too much to do in a day and sleep is just wasted time. To which I'll say, that's not true at all. Sleep is actually an incredibly complex process that's driven by 2 different mechanisms. So the first is what you call your sleep drive, which basically, as the longer you're awake, the more and more sleep pressure will build up. And the only way to release that pressure is actually by going to sleep. And then the other one is called the wake drive, which is also called your circadian rhythm, which fluctuates throughout the day. So this is what's kind of responsible for like the 2:30 or 3 p.m. dip. And also, if any of you have ever had like a 24-hour time period where you've stayed up, It's also the reason why around like 3 or 4 in the morning, you all of a sudden might get like a second wind. That's because of this wake drive, the circadian rhythm. Why that happens at 3 to 4 a.m., I'm not exactly sure, but that's the reason why. So you have these two processes that play with each other, and they kind of dictate how tired you are and when you're tired. Sleep is also super complex in terms of what's happening while you're asleep. So there's all these different phases of sleep, which I have labeled here: wake sleep, NREM1, NREM2, deep sleep, and dream sleep. In each cycle, you go through each of these stages of sleep. A cycle lasts about 90 minutes, and each cycle changes as you go through the night. So in the beginning of the night, you mainly have deep sleep. And then as you go through the night, you get less and less deep sleep and you get more dream sleep. And so what that means is, I guess the purpose of that is that deep sleep cleans your brain and it moves information from short-term storage into long-term storage. So this is like why you can't remember what you had for lunch the day before, because your brain has determined that that's not important information, but you might remember something that you read or, some important conversation you had, because while you're sleeping, your brain basically cleaned out all of that excess information and moved it to long and only kept the important stuff. So that's what happens during deep sleep. Dream sleep is what actually ties all of these things together. So you take all these potentially disconnected facts and then you tie them together in your brain and your neural network. And so this is actually, in some of these connections are connections that you would not have made otherwise. So this is why you might have a dream that includes one person from 10 years ago and one person from yesterday and like a memory from, when you're a really young child, all in the same thing, because it's forming these connections that you wouldn't have otherwise. And that's actually really important for not only creativity, but also problem solving. So kind of a list of some of the things that deep sleep does and why deep sleep is valuable is that it enhances list memorization, it prepares your mind to learn more, and it just recharges your body and mind overall. Dream sleep, as I said, has been really important for boosting creativity. It improves concept learning just in general. So remember, because it connects all those different things. And then it's also super important for managing stress and emotional regulation. So that's something that I think, the stress management in particular, I think is something that I can't harp on enough, because it's just, we're all under a lot of stress. And so getting sleep helps with that. And so what is the impact of sleep on your work in general? So, there's this balance between, if you sleep less, well, potentially you have more time to do more things. And if you sleep more, you'll have less time. But I truly believe that if you sleep more, the productivity benefits of the sleep actually far outweigh the consequences of having slightly less time. And also, hopefully your days will be more enjoyable because you'll have more energy and you won't be as tired and grumpy probably. So here are 5 tips that I always like to share about how to improve your sleep. So in terms of the sleep topic of this, if you walk away from anything with any sort of information, these are the 5 things, which is the first thing is sleep consistency, which is waking up at basically the same time every day. That's like the number one thing that you can do to improve your sleep quality. Number 2 is get most of your sleep at night. Probably not as relevant for you, but more relevant for college students who might be taking naps during the day or kind of doing like multi-phasic sleep or anything like that. Make your room a sleep oasis. Only nap in 90, 26, or 5-minute intervals. I'll talk a little bit about that. And then also avoid regular use of melatonin and sleeping pills. They have a time and a place to use them, but I'm not really convinced that there's a benefit to using them every night and that maybe they're even detrimental. So sleep consistency. So this is kind of like the hot topic in sleep research right now. And poor sleep consistency. So this is like, let's say waking up at 6 a.m. one day, waking up at 9 a.m. the next day, and then waking up at like 7:30 the next day. That's poor sleep consistency. It's been linked to a host of different things. One of the biggest ones is that it was recently shown to have a really significant impact on overall mortality, as well as a bunch of health risks, as well as for students, worse grades. So what does making your sleep schedule consistent look like? So here's kind of an example schedule of a week. Maybe you have different days where you could sleep in at different times. Maybe this isn't as relevant for you as it is for college students, but you get the gist. You basically want to take your earliest wake up time and wake up no later than an hour after that throughout the week, including the weekends. So the fact that a lot of people sleep in on Saturdays and Sundays is a big part of the reason why Mondays are so painful in terms of waking up. Because basically, let's say you normally wake up at 6 a.m. on weekdays, and then Saturday and Sunday you sleep until 9. Well, your body starts to adjust like it would adjust to a different time zone. And so by the time that Monday rolls around, your body thinks you're in California, or I guess maybe, yeah, your body thinks you're in California, but you're now trying to wake up in Ohio again. So you can kind of see why that is not necessarily the best. And then, yeah, this is just kind of an example. And if you do want to take a nap, it's been shown that the best time to take a nap is kind of early afternoon, because that can kind of help you re-energize without hopefully impacting your ability to fall asleep the next night. And so one thing that like I talked to some people about is like, okay, what happens if you have a really late night? You're up late and you're doing work, or for college students, maybe they're partying. What do you do with the next day? So the most important thing is to try and wake up at the same time that you normally would, which I know sounds crazy because you're actually causing yourself, in theory, more sleep deprivation. But the reason why you do this is that you want to keep that wake up consistent. The time that you wake up is much more important than the time that you go to bed. So wake up at your same time. If you have to, take a nap in the early afternoon, and then go to bed actually early that night. And that's the best way to catch up on sleep. So tip number 2 is get 7 to 9 hours of sleep at night. And if you're in a heavy training period, like if you're training for a marathon or something like that, your sleep requirement might actually need to go up for an extra hour or so. The reason for this is that study after study after study has shown that if you get less than 7 hours of sleep per night, you will have worse, grades. You're more likely to get injured. You're more likely to get sick. And so, while some people I do believe can do well on 7 or 7.5 hours of sleep, I'm really skeptical of anyone that says that they truly are performing at a high level with less than 7 hours of sleep per night. And so part of the reason why people, get 6 hours of sleep per night and they say, oh, I'm fine, is because there's something called sleep deprivation acclimatization, which is basically as you get more tired, that becomes your new normal. And so you think that you're doing great when actuality you're significantly underperforming. So this is where something like a sleep tracker can actually come into like really, really valuable, because you can see objectively, oh, I haven't been getting enough sleep. You might feel like you're okay, but like you can see through the numbers that you're slipping in that maybe you could try and do a little bit better. So here's the impact of sleep deprivation on day-to-day life. So this is a study where they had participants sleep for either 8 hours every night, 6 hours, 4 hours, or not sleep at all for 2 days. And so really some of the crazy things that came out, and then they measured the number of concentration lapses that they had while doing an activity. And so what they found is that after one all-nighter, you have a 400% increase in the number of concentration lapses that you have. And that it then takes 7 days, getting 8 hours of sleep every night, to recover from staying awake for 24 hours. And then also the other thing, and then after 11 days of getting 6 hours of sleep, you're just as impaired as if you hadn't slept for 24 hours. And why does that matter? Well, in terms of like, I guess, an example of not being able to really perform or function properly, being awake for 24 hours is the same as having a blood alcohol concentration of 0.1. So legally, you're not allowed to drive at that point because you're so, you're just not functioning right. So next tip is make your room a sleep oasis. And so what does that mean? It basically means that you want to associate your bed with sleeping. Some people have issues with insomnia or not being able to fall asleep. And one potential cause of this is doing things in bed other than sleeping. So maybe that's watching TV, maybe that's doing work. The reason why is that your body associates actions with emotions. And so if you're doing work or stressful things in bed, when you get in bed, all of a sudden your body's gonna be like, oh my goodness, like I need to start doing work. And then it's gonna get stressed, and then you're not gonna be able to fall asleep. So kind of the key tenets for how to make your room a sleep oasis is use your bed only for sleep. Actually, colder temperatures are better. And around 65 degrees is the ideal temperature. Each person is a little different. So maybe you like it a little bit warmer or a little bit colder, but overall, a colder room is generally better. And make your room dark. So this is one thing that people don't realize, which is a very small amount of light can actually significantly impact your sleep quality. Like even just light shining in from under a doorway is enough to significantly impact the quality of your sleep and potentially wake you up or just make your sleep not as high quality. So it's recommended that like those little indicator lights on charge strips, that you actually put a piece of electrical tape over that, and turn off lights in other parts of your house as well that might kind of be shining into your bedroom. And then in terms of noise is something that I've been asked about before. There's no like real consensus on what the best noise level is. It's kind of more personal preference. And also sometimes that's not really out in your control. Like if you live in New York City or downtown or something like that, where there's always a lot of commotion. So yeah, so this is just, I guess, a little chart showing that even a very little amount of light can suppress melatonin, which is your body's natural hormone to help you fall asleep. So here are some examples of things that you can do to help prepare your body for sleep. So having a bedtime routine is super important. As I'm sure some of you have young kids or have had young kids, you don't just throw a baby in bed and then say, go to sleep. You have a routine, you read them a book, maybe you put them in their PJs, you help calm them down slowly over an X number of minutes. Adults are no different. We'd like to think that, we're better than that. We don't necessarily need that, but your body actually uses the same thing. It needs the same mechanism to help kind of relax and unwind and then go to sleep and have a successful sleep. So having a bedtime routine is super important. And some things, to do, silence your phone, taking a hot shower or bath actually helps, because what happens there is your body gets warm. And then when you get out of the shower, you dump all this heat to your extremities. And that actually mimics naturally that decrease in your core temperature is a signal for your body to fall asleep. And so, the big thing though is avoid kind of sugary, caffeinated, or just kind of high fat foods. And then also avoid bright lights. So some things not to do, watching TV, doing anything that's stressful, or eating, especially like a high sugar or high fat snack after dinner. Now, a protein shake is fine. That does not have an impact on sleep, as long as it's only a couple, like 100 or 200 calories, and is not a 600 calorie plus 10-ounce steak or something. So here's an example of a bedtime routine. One thing that I've kind of told people is that, as an idea that I've done in the past in terms of when I'm trying to change when I go to bed, is actually setting a bedtime alarm. So when you're trying to switch your bedtime, it can be really hard to go to sleep, especially if it's like an earlier bedtime because you're not used to it. So if you have like an alarm to remind you, hey, it's 30 minutes before I want to go to bed, it's time to start winding down. That can really help with some things. And so, the one thing on this routine that people always like talk about, they're like, what the heck, is brushing your teeth in a dark bathroom. So as we talked about a little bit, is light really, really wakes you up, and it has a really negative impact on your ability to fall asleep. Now, almost everyone has super bright bathroom lights. And so one of the worst things you can do is like go through this whole bedtime routine. You're about to fall asleep, and then you go into the bathroom and you switch on the lights, and now your brain is just woken up again. And basically all of that routine was for nothing. So I know it sounds crazy, but brush your teeth in a dark bathroom or maybe under just a nightlight or something like that. And then, so what do you do if you wake up in the middle of the night and can't fall back asleep? So the big thing is, like, you want to avoid significant light exposure. So don't look at your phone, don't turn on the lights. And if for whatever reason you can't fall back asleep after like 10 or 15 minutes, I'll talk a little bit about what you do shortly. So next tip is nap in 5, 26, or 90-minute increments. And so the reason for this is if you sleep for more than 30 minutes, you actually start to go into those deeper phases of sleep. And that's why you feel groggy when you wake up. So if you sleep for 45 minutes, you're probably going to be in deep sleep or in REM sleep. And it takes a long time for you to wake up from that. Whereas if you sleep for only 26 minutes, you only go into the lighter phases of sleep. And so you're getting some rejuvenation benefits without going into those deeper sleep phases. And NASA's actually shown, they have their astronauts sleep for 26 minutes is kind of what their definition of a power nap is. Or if you sleep for 90 minutes, that's really good for kind of making up for lost sleep. And that way you go through a full sleep cycle. And so again, you start with light sleep, you go into deeper phases, and then you come out after about 90 minutes with in a lighter phase of sleep. And so the one thing that I always get asked is like, okay, well, like, how do I time that? It's basically just from when you close your eyes, not from like when you fall asleep, because how are you going to know when you fall asleep? Even if you just close your eyes for 5 minutes and you don't fall asleep, that's beneficial. So then the last thing is melatonin. So a lot of people are starting to use melatonin kind of as a sleep aid, and there's definitely a time and a place for melatonin. Melatonin is really valuable for jet lag to kind of help with that. So you should take it like an hour or two before you want to go to bed. But melatonin is not a hormone that causes you to stay asleep. It helps you just fall asleep. There's a big difference there. And the other thing that I'll say is that it's not regulated. Melatonin is a supplement. And so there was actually a study that looked at how much melatonin was actually present in the supplements that you buy over the counter. And you're getting somewhere between 27 to 500% of what was advertised. So just keep that in mind as well. And like, I do think overall it's safe. I don't think there's any problems with it. I just think that overall being able to sleep naturally is obviously better than relying on something else to help fall asleep. So one of the best things that you can do if you're having trouble falling asleep, or if you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't fall back asleep, is to do the following. So let's say you're in bed for 20 minutes and 20 or 30 minutes and you can't fall asleep. What is recommended to do is get out of bed, but do something under very, very low light and low stimulation. So like, I've actually done this in the past where I just get out of bed and I just keep the lights off and I just stretch for like 10, 15 minutes. And then you return to bed when you are sleepy. The key here is that we don't want to associate the bed with not being able to sleep. That's kind of why we do this. So you get out of bed when you can't sleep so that the bed does not become stressful because you're unable to sleep. I hope that makes sense. And let's say it's like really bad and like you only get like 2 hours of sleep that night. The recommendation is actually to sleep deprive yourself the next day so that it's really easy to fall asleep. So wake up at your normal time, keep that sleep consistency, avoid caffeine or naps, and then go to bed at the time that you want to go to bed in, and hopefully that will work. But eventually you will fall asleep eventually. I know when you have insomnia, it feels like you're never going to be able to sleep at all ever again. But eventually you will fall asleep. I guarantee you, physiologically, it will happen at a certain point. And so if you have kind of like any of the following where you have difficulty falling asleep, constantly staying asleep, and these problems are occurring like pretty often and in such a way that it impacts your functioning, I would recommend reaching out to a clinical psychologist, and they will probably prescribe something called CBTI, which is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which has actually proven to be more efficacious than pretty much any sleep aid on the market. either over the counter or prescription. So the other thing, some people will kind of do this pattern of they'll take a sleeping pill, they'll have caffeine during the day to be energized, and then they can't fall asleep at night, so they'll take a sleeping pill at night. Well, if you do this, it actually creates really ineffective sleep because caffeine is known to inhibit your ability to go into deep sleep. And sleeping pills are actually sedatives. They don't create natural sleep. And so they actually inhibit your ability to go into dream sleep. And so basically, if you take both of those things, you're not getting deep sleep or dream sleep. And so all you're getting is really light sleep, which is not really effective kind of at any point. And so I've also been asked before during some of these talks, what are some of my favorite quote unquote devices? Whoop and Oura Ring, I think, are really kind of the best things on the market for this. They've been kind of third-party validated to be kind of the best in terms of tracking your sleep. And they are pretty accurate. I've used both. I personally prefer Whoop because I just don't really love the Ring kind of format as much. And then in terms of something that's really cool but really expensive, is the 8 Sleep mattress, which is a temperature regulated mattress. It tracks your sleep and kind of tells you what stages you went in and how long you slept and everything, but it also regulates the temperature of the mattress so that you're at an ideal temperature. Like sometimes maybe you and your partner have different sleeping temperatures. Like so one person sleeps without the covers and one person sleeps in a hoodie and sweatpants and five comforters on top of them. That mattress enables it so that that's no longer a problem, but it is very expensive. So again, here are some 5 takeaways about sleep. And then kind of the last pillars that I wanted to touch on. I don't have quite as much to talk about because there's a lot of research on there and I'm definitely not an expert and haven't done as much research in them, but I wanted to say a couple things about them, which is the exercise is super important. And I truly believe that it enhances all aspects of your life. For me personally, I view it as an escape from med school, a stress relief. It helps you fall asleep because it makes you tired. And it also, I believe, is a creativity booster. Like when I'm doing my workouts is actually when I've had some of my best ideas because my mind is just, it's kind of an escape and it can kind of just go to other places. And I will say that I truly believe that I am productive because of, not in spite of all the training that I do, kind of for those reasons. And so I kind of put together a couple of tips for like, how do you fit exercise into your day? I know it's hard. Everyone has a lot of things going on. A lot of times you're tired. So I guess my 5 tips are like, do your best to make it a priority. For me, one of the best things to do is to do it first thing in the morning because that's when I have the most motivation to do it. I often do get the crankies before I do my afternoon workout, but I guess as a professional triathlete, I force myself to do it anyways. But if I wasn't a professional triathlete, it would be much easier for me to just skip out on that afternoon workout because I'm tired. I think be creative with it. So maybe it's taking the stairs instead of taking the elevator, or you go on a walk with someone for a meeting instead of having a meeting sitting down, things like that. A big thing I think is find something that you love doing, because I think a lot of people are like, oh, I have to go to the gym and run on the treadmill. And like, I run on the treadmill a lot and I hate it. And again, like if this wasn't like a part of kind of my career, I probably wouldn't run on the treadmill ever because it's not enjoyable. So, get outside if you can, or, go play an intramural sport or something like that. And then the last thing I'll say, is that I do think that there's a point of exercise where being uncomfortable is part of the goal. We all live very comfortable lives. And I think that that little bit of discomfort that you get while exercising can actually be really productive in terms of a lot of things. So nutrition. So this is also super difficult to discuss in terms of a group setting because there's, a lot of different, kind of theories about out there, whether it be paleo or Mediterranean diet or like, low carb or whatever. There's a diet for everything. But kind of the most important thing I'll say is that everyone's unique. And so what works for me doesn't necessarily work for you, which is why I think that a nutritionist is super worth it. I've learned a lot by having a nutritionist and they've really helped me I guess, eat in a way that helps me feel more energized. Whereas before I was eating in a way that actually made me more tired because I was doing something like I would eat really sugary foods, which would make me feel better. And then like I would have a sugar crash after it, and then I'd feel like crap. And so then I'd have more sugar, and then I'd have another spike, and then I'd have a crash. And so glucose monitor is another tool that's becoming available in the US for over-the-counter use that can kind of help you experiment with your nutrition a little bit and figure out like what works best for you in terms of eating from an energy standpoint and kind of just day-to-day life, quality of life standpoint. The one thing I'll say with that though is that if you get a glucose monitor, there's a lot of like influencers out there or whatnot that have them, and a lot of people are talking about glucose monitors when they don't necessarily have the background to do so. So just be careful what you read on the internet and make sure that you really understand what a glucose monitor is telling you if you get it. The last thing I think that's super important is, what I call these energizers, whether that's friends, family, hockey, hobbies, pretty much any other activity that enables you to disconnect from your work, let your mind focus on something else, have a little fun, be happy. I think those are all super important things to do. And yes, they take time, but again, the theme of this talk is that doing things outside of work, I believe actually makes your work more productive and more successful.